to the fourth and last program in this season of the Landmark Series, Public Affairs Forum. As the League celebrates 75 years of women's suffrage, we are pleased to be a partner with Minnesota Landmarks to further the mission of providing information for an active understanding of public issues. We extend our thanks to the sponsors of the series, which include the St. Paul Companies, Northwest Area Foundation, U.S. West, and the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Thank you also to the Citizens League and Keystone Productions for in-kind support. At the door, you receive little cards. If you would have any questions, please write them on the cards, and Dr. Fuller will take a few questions at the close of his presentation. Please note that there is also a panel discussion. You're all welcome to stay and ask further questions and have more dialogue with Dr. Fuller after his presentation. If you'd like to stay for the panel discussion, it'll be in this room, and just stay in your seats or maybe move up to the front a little bit. At this time, I'd like to welcome Dr. Kerman Gaines, Superintendent of Schools for the St. Paul's Public School District, who will introduce our speaker today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm extremely pleased and honored to be able to introduce our speaker today. He not only is a colleague of mine, a well-respected colleague in school administration throughout this country, but he's also a good friend. Our speaker is currently superintendent of the Milwaukee Public Schools. Prior to that, he served as director of the Milwaukee County Department of Health and Human Services, Dean of the General Education, Milwaukee Area Technical College. He's also served as the Secretary of the Wisconsin Department of Employment Relations. In addition to that, he has received numerous honors and awards for his work in the community prior to being as a superintendent. To those of us who know our speaker around the country, he's not shy about letting you know where he stands on issues. He is not shy about raising the tough issues and challenging you on those tough issues. As a community activist in the Milwaukee area, people there respect him very highly. Since he's assumed the superintendent of Milwaukee on the national level, I'm working with the Council of Great City Schools. And again, there we also had an opportunity to interact with him. Our speaker today, as he talked with us, I would like you to keep in mind that while much of his experience and comments may be related to the Milwaukee area, we in the Twin Cities area find that our demographics as well as our poverty level are quite similar to what we find in the Milwaukee area. So I do believe we're going to be able to draw some parallels from his comments today that would be applicable to what we are trying to do here in the Twin Cities areas as it relates to addressing the issue of desegregation, integration, and also the poverty level within our community. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Howard Fuller.
Thank you. I want to thank Kervin for that very nice introduction. I also want to personally thank him for helping me figure out how to work with superintendents. Since when I became the superintendent, I had never been a principal or teacher, and they had to change the state law in order for me to be the superintendent. So it was a new experience. So people like him were extremely helpful to me. I also want to thank all the people who made it possible for me to be here, all of the people involved with the Landmark series. There is one special person here, though, that I want to acknowledge, and that's Kwame McDonald. Kwame has known me since I was 14. I was the first president of his Tomorrow's Science and Technicians program when he worked for the Milwaukee Urban League. So he is a mentor of mine, and So any of the stuff that you all don't like that I'm getting ready to say is his fault. I was asked to talk on this topic, desegregation and community building. And I've thought a lot about this, and I'm going to do my best to discuss this issue in a way that at least touches on the central theme that you have set forward, and I hope in question and answers I can get deeper into these issues. I do want to make 2 points at the outset. Number one, I'm not here today representing the Milwaukee Public Schools. I will always be grateful for the opportunity that I have been given to be the superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools, at least for a couple of more weeks. And I want to say very honestly that there is no job like a superintendent. There's a very special job, and I'm deeply appreciative of the people in Milwaukee who gave me the opportunity to be their superintendent. But the ideas and views that I'm going to be expressing today are my own. Secondly, I will be coming out of an African-American perspective. I'm not going to cite a whole lot of data, nor do I believe that I can come to St. Paul and tell you what you should or should not do. I don't see myself as any kind of expert on this question. I do, however, have some very definite views, and I have come to these ideas after years of study, but more important, after years of fighting at various levels for the freedom and liberation of African American people. I've gone through many philosophical and ideological changes in my life, but the one constant is my burning desire to achieve real freedom for my people, particularly those who are poor and powerless. So while my emphasis today will be on education, I have always been clear about the relationship between the effort to educate our children and the effort to empower our community. In 1935, W.E.B. Du Bois set forth a view about schooling for black people that has been a guide for my thinking and my actions on this issue. He stated, theoretically, the Negro needs neither segregated schools nor mixed schools. What he needs is education. What he must remember is that there is no magic either in mixed schools or in segregated schools. A mixed school with poor and unsympathetic teachers, with hostile public opinion, and no teaching of truth concerning black folk is bad. A segregated school with ignorant placeholders, inadequate equipment, poor salaries is equally bad. Other things being equal, the mixed school is the broader, more natural basis for the education of all of our youth. It gives wider contacts, it inspires greater self-confidence, and it suppresses the inferiority complex. But other things seldom are equal. And in that case, sympathy, knowledge, and the truth outweigh all that mixed schools can offer. Let me be absolutely clear. I do not, under any conditions, support any policy, procedure, law, or rule that denies black people access to any aspect of our society because of race, nor indeed did W.E.B. Du Bois. In another article entitled Whither Now and Why, he made the following statement. We should never give up the fight against color discrimination. We must accept equality or die. What we must do is lay down a line of thought and action which will accomplish two things. One, the utter disappearance of color discrimination in American life. And secondly, the preservation of African American history and culture as a valuable contribution to modern civilization as it was to medieval and ancient civilization. He goes on to say that Negro communities, Negro private schools, Negro colleges will and must be organized and supported. This racial organization will be voluntary and not compulsory. It will not be discriminatory. It will be carried on according to a definite object and ideal. But what American Negroes must remember is that voluntary organizations for greater ends is far different from compulsory segregation for evil purposes. The problem is the fact that in America, segregation has always had an evil purpose. And that purpose being to make sure that African American people are labeled and defined as being inferior, and as a result, ensure that we are precluded from full and equal participation in American society. Therein flows the dilemma for African American people. If we try to be by ourselves, history has shown us that every effort will be made to define those schools, those associations, and organizations as inferior to their white counterparts. If public monies are involved, historically the goal has been to make sure that we got less of them than our white counterparts. On the other hand, when you fight for integration, even when we finally get it, it has often been done in a manner that accommodates whites irrespective of our needs, our concerns, and our interests. The implementation of desegregation in Milwaukee is a prime example of this point. The Milwaukee Public Schools developed and implemented a desegregation program that placed the burden squarely on the backs of the black community. The plan systematically bussed black students out of their attendance areas, closed schools in the black community, and converted other black attendance area schools to specialty schools, to which neighborhood students had no attendance rights. Between 1950 and 1979, 48 new schools were built in Milwaukee. 38, mostly elementary schools, were located in white neighborhoods. This resulted in more and smaller white attendance areas and fewer and larger black attendance areas. To exacerbate the situation, the school district closed schools in the black community, converted others to specialty schools, thereby reducing even further the number of attendance area schools available to black students. And then they implemented the busing plan. And when they implemented it, and the reason why I know all this is because I did my dissertation on it. So y'all understand where I'm coming from. The MPS assignment guidelines, it was contained within a book that I found called A Comprehensive Plan for Increasing Educational Opportunities and Improving Racial Balance in the Milwaukee Public Schools. This document stated that each student would be assigned an attendance area and that preference would be given to the current residential population in attending an attendance area school when that population could be accommodated under racial balance requirements. Now, this is interesting because what this did was it presented a double problem for black students. Number one, the fact that the black attendance areas were large in comparison to white attendance areas meant that it was not possible for all of the black students to attend their attendance area school. Remember what I said about building those schools. And secondly, since MPS would not bus adequate numbers of white students into black attendance areas to achieve integration, most black students were left with no real choice. Their numbers mitigated against being in their attendance area schools to achieve integration. And since they weren't going to bus white kids in there, there was no way then for them to stay. Very interesting way that they did this. And so in essence, for the vast majority of black students, their choice was to leave their communities and go into white communities to attend school. This was known as voluntary integration. In essence, though, what it was forced voluntary integration. For white students, their situation was very different. Because of where they had built these schools, they had complete access to their neighborhood schools, whereas black folks did not. And in 1977, they asked the superintendent, the then superintendent of the Milwaukee Public Schools, what do you think about this? And he replied, because someone said that, look, aren't you in fact putting a burden on black people? His reply was interesting. He said, the whole concept of burden is ridiculous. It is ridiculous to talk of burden when the parents and students are moving voluntarily. It would be very difficult for the court to object to black parents opting out of containment into a desegregated opportunity. At the heart of his comments was an attempt to deny the manner in which black students have been parsed out all over the city in Milwaukee in such a way that the guidelines of the court were being met and the wishes of whites not to be enrolled in black attendance areas were being accommodated. To the point that we went into black attendance areas and sent kids from one attendance area to over 100 different elementary schools. Now you have to understand that in this same planning document, there was a statement that hit me like a bolt when I read it. It said, and I quote, that MPS believes that providing for whites the psychological guarantee of not having to attend a school that is predominantly minority will tend to stabilize the population in the city. Now we have to understand all of this looking at it now in 1995. Because at that point in time, this tipping point theory that is still operative in America today was at the forefront. Because the whole substance of this was white people are not going to go into a place where they ain't in control, where they're not the majority. And a place is integrated if it's predominantly white, but after a certain number of you all get in it, it's no longer integrated. It has tipped, and now it has become segregated. So that what this really all dealt with, and those of you who studied the Brown decision, if you've studied the Brown decision, look at both Brown 1 and Brown 2. But don't just look at the decision, look at the footnotes. Because it's the footnotes that the judges really use as a basis for some of their decision making. One of the footnotes was Gurner Myrdal's book that he wrote in the 40s, where he talked about the pathological condition of the African American community. David Ausubel's study, where he talked about the fact that blackness is like seared into the minds of black people, and this whole inferior thing is something that in essence has become a part of our mindset. And you have to understand all of this, because if you operate on the basis that the black community is pathologically inferior, then it stands to reason that you would say to these black kids, if you want to get something, you got to get out of there in order to get it. And then obviously, I know white people are going to go in there. So these are harsh words. but they're not my words. And so when you look at what happened in Milwaukee, that is what happened. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot more about that, because the interesting thing is I read this article that you all had. It was either the Minneapolis paper or St. Paul, one of them. I'm not sure which one. But it was like it ran this series of articles about integration, and they did the one on Milwaukee. All they talked about in that article was chapter 220. All that is 6,000 black kids that go from the city to the suburbs. That's not the heart of the integration issue in Milwaukee. The real issue is what happened in the city, not what happened to 6,000 kids who go from Milwaukee to the suburbs. So I'm using that as an example of my point about how even after you get integration, you don't always get what you think you were going to get when you went out there to get it. Now, what does that mean? Black people are caught between a rock and a hard place. Lerone Bennett, in his book, The Shaping of Black America, was discussing the problem that black people had as they fought for freedom from slavery. And what he said was, beyond a doubt, blacks wanted freedom, and they fought for it. But they were powerless, and their adversaries held all of the high ground. For them and the millions who would follow, this was one of history's hard places, one of the impossible historical situations that condemned people to centuries of horror with no hope of immediate escape or salvation. There are impossible historical situations, and this was one of them. There was no immediate possibility of escape for the black victims, and there was no immediate possibility of triumph. And there was nothing in the world that they could do about it except to play the cards that history had dealt, waiting and watching, taking advantage of every opportunity, extending the lines of hope and organization. Now, I'm not suggesting that the situation related to desegregation is the same as the problems we faced in the fight against slavery. But I do believe that we have always been in situations where our choices give us neither escape nor triumph. And what we have to do is to take advantage of opportunities as they present themselves to us, always trying to extend the lines of hope as we struggle to push further down the road to freedom. So given that, what lessons have I drawn from Du Bois and others, as well as my own over 25 years of struggling to figure out how to best educate African American kids? I have concluded that any strategy that purports to help our children that does not take into account the interests, the needs, and the realities of what it means to be black in America is destined to fail. It is my contention that after over 40 years, or almost 40 years, of pursuing various desegregation strategies, we have had at best mixed results. Some good, some bad. And I believe this will always be the case because it is faulty reasoning to assume that in America, sitting a black child next to a white child will in fact guarantee that our children will learn. Or for that matter, create an environment that is even a necessary condition for our kids to learn. The fact is, unless we deal with the differential power realities that exist in America, there will be no significant change. Sarah Lightfoot, writing in Derek Bell's book, Shades of Brown, made exactly this point. She said that a critically important ingredient of educational success for black and white children lies in the power relationships between communities and schools, rather than in the nature of the student population. Mixing black and white bodies together in the same school and preserving the same relationships and perceptions between the schools and the families they serve is unlikely to substantially change the structures, rules, and relationships within schools that define the equality of the educational process. The nature and distribution of power among schools, families, and communities is a crucial piece of the complex puzzle leading towards educational success for all children. So Dr. Du Bois was right. What our children need is an education. Or more to the point, what they need are policies, procedures, and practices that will facilitate learning. If the last 30-plus years of school desegregation has proven anything, it is the fact that there is little discernible correlation between effective education and the mere shuffling of black bodies to achieve the, quote, right mix with non-black bodies. Federal Judge Robert Carter, one of the leading attorneys in the Brown litigation, spoke directly to this point. He's the one who had the responsibility to introduce Kenneth Clark's dolls and all of that research that flowed out of that. This is what Robert Carter said. He said, integrated education must not be lost as the ultimate solution. That would be a disaster in my judgment. For the present, however, to focus on integration alone is a luxury that only the black middle class can afford. They have the means to desert the public schools if they're dissatisfied. They can obtain remediation if necessary and get their children into colleges or some income-producing enterprise. The immediate and urgent need, and he wrote this in 1980. It might as well be today. The immediate and urgent need of the black urban poor is the attainment in real life terms and in settings of virtually total black-white school separation. The urgent need for them is to get at least some of the constitutional guarantees that Brown requires. The only way to ensure that thousands of black urban poor will have even a remote chance of obtaining the tools needed for them to compete in the marketplace for a decent job and its accompanying benefits is to concentrate on having quality education delivered to the schools these blacks are attending and in all likelihood will be attending for at least another generation. Now, what does all of this mean? And what should we be focused on? I would argue that the issue is how to ensure that all of our children will learn. Therefore, I propose a three-pronged strategy. One, we must develop clear alternatives to the existing system. Those alternatives would be charter schools, choice, public-private partnerships. I'll be glad to talk about each one of those because I have definite ideas about each one of those. The second part of the strategy has to be to reform the current system, that we must reinvent public education. And the third strategy is to develop neighborhood support systems for kids. And what I believe is that the alternative system, charters or whatever, are not an end. Choice, for me, is not an end. It's a means. And that if you develop some excellent choice schools and charter schools, but nothing happens to the system, then we will have failed. The purpose of this is to link the reform efforts outside with the reform efforts inside. The purpose is to empower parents in a way that they have never been empowered before. Poor parents. And the only way to really empower them is to put some money in their hands and say to the system, if you do not educate my child, not only am I going to leave, but I'm going to take the money with me. And I find it interesting how white and black people with money and unions who got control over money begin to react when you start talking like that. Oh, you're going to destroy the system. No. Here's the fundamental question. For whom is the system set up? If it's set up for kids and their families, I would argue it is in their best interest to have the widest range of options possible. Let me talk further about this. There are, in my mind, given those three ideas, and we can come back to them, I want to talk about the 5 elements of reform. The first element is, in order to reform these systems in urban areas, I don't know if it, and none of this may apply to you all. This is just me talking. You decide whether it applies to you. You cannot deal with the realities that our kids face without dealing with issues of race and class. Because fundamental to this is, what is our level of expectation for these children? And even deeper than that, how do we feel about these kids? And how do we feel about the families of these kids? And when I say, well, expectations, ask educators, do they believe all children can learn? Most of us will say yeah, because we learned you're supposed to say that. But then ask the next question, can all kids take algebra? Oh, no. No, some of these kids, they can't take algebra. Well, why? Well, they're not prepared. It's beyond them. See, it's when you get into the second level of the questions that you find out that many of us don't believe that all children can learn. Are tied into issues of race and class. And unless you deal with those issues straightforward, you cannot engage in reform. Secondly, we have to reform what we teach, how we teach, and who's going to do the teaching. And that we must dismantle this industrial paradigm. And so what I'm saying is the 2 by 4 by 6 by 9 by 12 paradigm is bankrupt. The idea that all learning is going to take place based on what's between the 2 covers of a textbook is going to be done within the 4 walls of the classroom, whereas Perlman says you're going to engage in yak in the box for 47 minutes. That it can all be done in 6 evenly spaced periods during the day. That it takes 9 months, and after 12 years they're educated. That's a bankrupt paradigm. And so what we must say is we have to reform the curriculum so that the curriculum has to be rigorous. It has to, for African American children, and I'm sure for other non-white children, it ought to somehow recognize and incorporate them in the learning process. And I find people who really say, well, you're talking about that Afrocentric stuff, or you're talking about this multicultural, and that lowers the standards. Well, what is the standard? Does it lower the standard to really study the contribution of African people to world civilization? Is Du Bois' book, The World in Africa, a low standard book? I mean, what do people mean when they say that? What they mean is we are not prepared to understand that America does not belong to white people. That America belongs to white people, black people, red people, brown people, yellow people, all of the people who participated in making America. And the whole issue is to incorporate all of these people in the process, but in a rigorous way. So we have to change the curriculum. We have to change the pedagogy. I support school to work, but not the school of work that some people think about. Like I've been on the pilgrimage to Germany, you know, because whenever you start talking about school of work in Wisconsin, my good friend, the governor, wants you to go to Germany. So I went to Germany. I go to Germany. I went to Denmark and Sweden. And what I came back with is the last thing we need to be doing is developing the German model. And I can talk about why. I can talk about the Hauptschule and the gymnasium and why I don't want my kids in that. I believe that our school of work effort ought to be about lifelong learning. It doesn't begin in middle school and high school, it begins in kindergarten. I believe the purpose of school of work is to break down the walls between the school and the community and to understand that learning can take place anytime, anywhere, any place. And that we need to have kids everywhere where learning can happen. But you can't do that if you textbook bound, if you school building bound, and if you technologically illiterate. So that leads me then to, we have to look at integrated curriculums. We have to look at cooperative learning. We have to look at teacher as facilitator as opposed to teacher as the depository of knowledge that you're going to somehow put into these empty heads and have them regurgitate it back to you. I mean, this is a whole different way of looking at how we have to pursue learning. And critical to all of that is technology. So what we teach, how we teach it, and then who will teach them. And I want to tell you all, everybody understand me, if you don't love these kids, if you don't care deeply for these kids, I don't believe you can teach them. And I don't want nobody in front of my kids who don't care about them. And we got a lot of people who are teaching, who are not to be teaching anybody's child, ever. And the people who protect them and keep them in front of our children are engaging in criminal behavior. Now, this is hard stuff. But you know why? Because every day our kids are dying as people continue to protect systems that are helping to intellectually destroy them. So then we also have to, third issue of this, is deal with governance and structure. I believe in charter schools. I believe in public-private partnerships. I believe in a system of schools, or almost a system of learning opportunities instead of a school system. I believe the objective is to break down these bureaucracies, to put the power at the level of the individual school, to let the individual school make the decision about budget, personnel, and curriculum. Now, people say to me, but Howard, what you're doing is you're trying to discard our system. William Daggett said, we must love our children's hopes, dreams, prayers, and aspirations more than we do the institutional heritage of the school system. See, the fundamental question is, again, who is this for? And if it is for the kids, then it is to their advantage to have a decentralized system. But a decentralized system will never work without the fourth area, and that's accountability. And you do not have accountability unless you have standards, unless you have a way to assess those standards, information so that people know how well they're doing, and then here's the tough one, you have to have consequences. If there are no consequences, there are no systems of accountability. And I'm for closing failing schools, as an example. Another thing people don't like about me. I'm saying, tell me why we ought to march kids year after year into death. We march them into these schools year after year, and nobody learned anything in these schools in 10 or 15 years, and they all still open, and everybody there know no matter what happened, everybody gonna get paid. And when you start asking why, they start talking about all the variables that happen to kids before they ever get to us. I had people tell me, Howard, I could do a much better job if y'all got us better kids. And my answer is that these parents sent the best kids they got. I'm serious about it. I'm telling you, and ultimately, and I'm going to just be upfront about this, I don't think there's going to be any accountability in these districts and these systems until we put some power in parents' hands, until we create these alternatives, until we create options, until we create the possibility for parents to say, I don't like what you're doing, and I'm leaving. And you know what's so interesting about this is, I know you all, maybe you all saw, but they did an analysis of where public school teachers send their kids. Yes. And what's intriguing is, like in Milwaukee, over 32% of them, and it may be higher, who don't have their kids in the Milwaukee public schools. But you know what? They making money to enable them to make the choices, and their choice is to send their kids outside of the system that they teaching in. Now you tell me what that message is. Now, so I'm saying ultimately accountability is not going to be in this lukewarm parent involvement that we all talk about. Because most of us want parents to be involved but not empowered. And in America, there's a direct link between money and power. And the only people in America, and this leads me to my fifth point, is we have to deal with how schools are financed. Now, I do not believe that money alone makes a difference. But I believe in America, money is an important ingredient in the overall effort to make a difference. And the only people in America who say that money is not important are people who have money. And it is an issue if one school district can spend $12,000 per child and another $5,000. And I'm not saying that just now turning all of the money into the $5,000 is going to make a difference. But I am saying that with a lot of these other changes and a better way of financing schools, it will make a difference for our children. So what does all of this have to do with community building? Well, it depends on which community you're talking about. In Milwaukee, I believe the manner in which desegregation was implemented has played a role in destroying a sense of community in many African American neighborhoods, and I do not believe that it has brought the whole community together. Nor do I believe it has had an overall positive effect on the achievement levels of African American kids. So, will that happen in St. Paul? I don't know. See, I don't know what you all ought to do in the Twin Cities. That's for you to decide. I mean, because I'm neither for desegregation or against it. I'm for what works. And in some situations, as Du Bois said, it'll be good, in some situations not. Now, 2 points in conclusion. Number one, real integration in America does not take place on playgrounds. It happens in the marketplace. And if African American children are not prepared to compete in that place, they will forever be confined to the worst corners of American society. Education, I believe, is not the only, certainly it's not the only, but it is a very critical tool to get them off of those corners. Therefore, educational achievement must be the central strategy for our children. Number two, an effective learning environment can be had in a situation that is all black, and it is also possible for African American kids to thrive in a desegregated environment. It all depends on the kinds of issues that I discussed earlier. What are the expectations? Are they integrated into the learning process? What is the learning paradigm that we're using? What is the power relationships within the school, within the community? All those issues that I have talked about. So the central point that I've tried to make today is simply this, that for African American people, our reaction to desegregation must be fluid. As I just said, it all depends on the circumstances. I began with Du Bois, and I'll leave you with Du Bois. He said that our philosophy, therefore, must undertake first to examine the facts, and secondly, to see what action, in view of these facts, will bring the best results for the American Negro and the human culture. And this action must vary with time and place. Thank you very much.
Those of you who have questions, please hold them up and we'll collect them.
Should we have more schools for problem and disruptive children? That's a real tough one, because I believe a lot of kids are disruptive and problems because those schools are not meeting their needs. And what I worry about is that if you start having schools for disruptive kids, then as you put them out, there will be a new group that people will create to put out. And so I think the real issue that we have to deal with is people taking ownership of all of these kids. And I think if we are willing to redefine and be more flexible in how we go about educating different kids, we can develop a lot of different models that will work for different kids. Now, there are some hardcore kids out here. I want to be blunt. I mean, we got some kids that kill you. And that's a statement about a lot of things. And I'm not sure that any kind of school is necessarily going to reach some of these young people. But even some of them can be reached depending upon the environment. So I guess my point is I tend not to want to talk about schools for disruptive children as much as I want to talk about providing a variety of different places for a variety of different kinds of kids to learn. Because there's been a lot of research on people have taken so-called disruptive kids and put them in a different learning environment, and they've moved on to become excellent. And so I think we need to be very careful about how we approach this issue. I don't have an answer to it. These are just ideas, that I have. I'll try to take them and go fast. Okay. You believe in community and you believe in freedom. Freedom, I can't read that. Can you read that?
Free choice.
Oh, you believe in the free choice of vouchers, is that what it is? What would this lead? First of all, I think the community is already fragmented. The difference is we refuse to recognize it and understand how it works. And it's fragmented now on the basis of race and class. And the people who are poor have the least power. What I'm suggesting might in fact create a greater sense of community because it will begin to empower people so that they can participate in an effective way in the larger community. And I think ultimately that's what we're all about. Now, could what I am talking about lead to further problems? It could. But my view is, given what currently exists, we got to be willing to try something different because we already know what this stuff is doing, and I'm willing to take the risk that this might create something better. If it doesn't, then we need to try something else. That to me is how you have to work in the world. Okay, what lessons about the role of teachers' unions and school boards do you take from your decision to resign in Milwaukee? Well, first of all, I'm still working till June 30th, so I have to be careful what I say up here so this don't get back. But no, I have great respect for the teacher union in Milwaukee. They're very clear on what their objective is. Their objective is to protect their teachers. And my job as a superintendent is to protect my kids. That's the rub. And they're very clear on what their job is. So I'm saying to them, fine. That's why I want to support choice, because I don't believe unless I can create some other options, we will ever get you to understand that your fundamental relationship is with these kids. And so I'm not bitter or anything. I mean, they have a very clear notion. What I've learned is that they are very well organized, they're clear on what their mission is, and they are ruthless in the pursuit of their mission. And I have respect for people like that. And so I know that I have to be equally prepared to approach what I believe is the support for my kids in the same way. What I've learned about school boards is that they change. You know, there are elections, and some of the people who used to support you are no longer there, and you get other people on it. And if you got 9, you have to be able to count to 5. And if you can't count to 5, or you spend all your time trying to count to 5, it's time for you to leave. That's what I learned. Kirby taught me how to count to 5. So I thought it was 4. He said, no, you got to be able to count to 5. When you put the power in the hands of the parents, what happens when only a few parents participate in setting the budget for the school, hire the principal, help hire the teachers? Well, the fact is that happens now. I mean, in most situations, a relatively few people participate in the process. I think we will have a greater chance of expanding the participation. I want everybody to understand, I'm not Pollyannish about this. It's very difficult in some situations to get parents involved. I know that. One of the things I think we need to create is a parent information center that is not connected to any school system. The sole purpose is to give parents information about individual schools and to help them understand how to access better choices for their kids. I do not believe that because people are poor, they are incapable of making good decisions about their children. I think elitist intellectuals have that type of misguided and paternalistic and maternalistic view about poor people. Now, there's some poor people who are going to make bad decisions about their kids, but the vast majority of them will make good decisions for their kids if we can help them make the decisions. I believe that one of the reasons, and there are others, but one reason some parents don't participate is because they done figured out that what we asking them to participate in ain't nothing. In the other areas, people don't participate because they don't care. And in those instances, we're going to have difficulty. But we have that difficulty now. What I want to try to do is to at least create the possibility of change. Now, the thing is, I agree with you that if you have a true site-based management, and most of what we call site-based management is an illusion, okay, just so everybody understands. We say you got site-based management, and here's the 10% of the decisions that you can manage. The other 85 have already been determined. Y'all will meet for 6 hours in the library hassling over the expenditure of $3,000, and the real budget you don't have no control over. So what I believe is that if we create the type of situation that I'm talking about, we may, and I'm saying may, be able to get more participation from parents because their relationship to the school will be radically different. In those places where we don't, I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to have to muddle through like we muddle through now. So I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. Are you aware of the Congressional House's proposal to eliminate the U.S. Department and programs that help students get access to higher education like TRIO? And how do you feel that is related to race, class, and choice? First of all, I'm sorry, I haven't been keeping up with that. I know that people have been talking about eliminating the Department of Education. I didn't know that I have to admit, I just haven't looked at this, so I haven't thought a lot about it. And how does this all relate to race, class, and choice? Everything that's done, I mean, in America, in my opinion, has some relationship to race and class. I don't think this has any particular relationship to the choice that I'm talking about. But whoever asked me this question, if you can ask me better, or not better, but a little bit deeper, maybe I can respond better. I got 2 more and I'll finish. Some argue that a full education involves the connection to people with jobs, higher ed, real-life opportunities. How is that possible in a segregated school setting where the segregated community has limited contacts? You have to develop more contacts. I mean, what I'm saying is, if you got a high school that's in an all-black community and you want to develop contacts, you have to get out of that community and go develop those contacts. Clearly, it's like people talk to me, why do you spend so much time with the business community? And my answer is, because they have money and you don't. And that my kids, if they're going to make it, they need resources. I can hear speeches. I need resources. Logic tells me that very few poor people have started foundations. Therefore, you have to go to the place where there are resources and you bring them in to your community. Now, the problem is some of us feel that people with money are omnipotent. Or to be blunt, a lot of black people feel white people are omnipotent. I don't. I believe that I can go into a room with somebody who has some interests that are different from mine, and I can come out of that room with some stuff that I need, understanding it's also going to meet some of their interests, or else they wouldn't be talking to me. But our interests intersect. Our worldview may not intersect, but our interests at that moment intersect. So for me, the fact that people are in a, quote, segregated community does not mean that they can't get out of that community and develop contacts for their kids. It's all in your mindset. And it's being done every day in America. I can take you to some of, quote, the worst schools in America, or schools that are located in some of the worst schools in America, and they've been able to develop partnerships and a whole range of things for their kids because their outlook was not fixed in the community in which they live. So, I mean, I think there's a variety of ways to do that. What types of standards and assessment techniques do you support? I'm going to get this right. I support authentic assessments. Y'all like that? I learned that term. but let me be serious. This is what I've been saying to my teachers. I say, look, my kids' life chances are going to be affected by how well they do on standardized tests. Therefore, we need to prepare our kids to take standardized tests, even though we believe these standardized tests inform lower order thinking. And people say to me, but Howard, we ought to be fighting to get portfolios and et cetera. And I agree. But in the meantime, while we fighting that, we need to be preparing kids to take the third grade reading test, the state test, because they're going to be judged based on how well they do on these tests. And the way I think we ought to do it, people say, but we'll start teaching to the test. Here's my question. If you're getting ready to take the GRE or the LSAT and you have money, what do? You go to Stanley Kaplan. You find somebody that's going to help you raise your point average by 100 to 1,000, and you go in there with your chest stuck out. You are not shamed when you go to Stanley Kaplan. So my same point with my third grade reading. When it's time to take the test, we need to take time out and prepare kids on the strategy to take these tests. And if you've done a good job on developing the content, you can help them develop the strategy to take the test. So even as we are trying to develop better tests, better assessment tools, we have to also deal with the ones that we have. One final point on that. We have a real problem in that I was reading this report, and it's probably accurate, that the, quote, average citizen sees a lot of stuff that the reformers are talking about as exotic. And there are a lot of people, for example, who believe that before you can get to higher order skills, you have to have basics. Before you can get on a computer, you need to know your math table. Well, the reality is you can do both. They are not sequential. They can be done at the same time. I believe that same thing about how we approach our movement from some of the current standardized tests that do inform lower order teaching and thinking to more aggressive tests that will inform higher order thinking. And so I do support portfolios, authentic assessment. I think all those things are good.
Thank you for coming.